When you disappeared, the first thing I noticed wasn't pain, it was silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that removes distraction. There was no one reacting anymore, no one explaining themselves, no one chasing, fixing, or softening the moment. At first, I mistook that quiet for relief. No arguments, no emotional labor, no pressure to respond. But silence doesn't stay neutral for long. It slowly turns into a mirror. Without your reactions, I had nothing external to lean on. I couldn't measure my importance through your effort anymore. Your absence didn't scream, it echoed. Every moment where I expected a message, reassurance, or emotional engagement became a reminder of what used to be there. The quiet forced me to sit with myself, and that's when the weight of the loss arrived. When you were present, your consistency made everything feel stable, even when things were uncertain. I didn't have to fully confront my actions because your presence buffered the consequences. But once you were gone, there was no buffer. The emotional safety net disappeared. I had to face the truth without comfort. Something valuable was no longer accessible to me. Your absence became louder than your presence ever was because presence can be taken for granted, but absence demands attention. I replayed moments I had minimized, efforts I had assumed would always be there. I realized that what I lost wasn't just a person, it was an emotional environment that made life feel grounded. The silence didn't punish me, it educated me. It showed me how much space you were holding, quietly, consistently, without needing recognition. And when that space collapsed, I finally understood the cost of losing someone who was emotionally available in ways I never fully acknowledged while they were still there. I didn't realize how much emotional stability I was leaning on until it vanished. Your consistency was subtle, not dramatic, not demanding. You were simply there, predictable, reassuring, available. I built my emotional rhythm around that without consciously valuing it. It became background support, something I assumed would remain no matter how I showed up. When that consistency disappeared, I felt ungrounded. Decisions felt heavier, emotions felt sharper. There was no one steadying the emotional ground beneath me. I wasn't prepared for how destabilizing that would feel. I had mistaken reliability for something ordinary, when in reality it was rare. Your reassurance had regulated my nervous system more than I knew. When things went wrong, your presence softened the impact. When I doubted myself, you stabilized the moment. Losing that didn't just create sadness, it created disorientation. I wasn't grieving loudly. I was struggling quietly to recalibrate. The truth is, I was leaning without acknowledging it. I was receiving without fully appreciating. And when the support was removed, I had to stand on emotional muscles I hadn't strengthened. That's when the vulnerability surfaced, not because I suddenly loved you more, but because I realized how much I depended on what you provided. It forced me to confront an uncomfortable reality. I benefited from your stability while undervaluing its importance. I didn't protect it. I didn't nurture it. I assumed it would remain because it always had. When it disappeared, I didn't just miss you. I missed who I was when I felt emotionally secure. Your consistency had quietly anchored me, and without it, I had to face the imbalance I had ignored for too long. The moment I sensed you had emotionally moved on, something inside me shifted. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even longing. It was the realization that I no longer held the same position in your emotional world. When you were engaged, reactive, and present, I felt a sense of control, even if I never consciously acknowledged it. Your detachment changed everything. You weren't asking questions anymore. You weren't explaining yourself. You weren't emotionally accessible on demand. That absence of engagement forced me to question my choices, my behavior, and the assumptions I had built around your availability. Scarcity created clarity. When someone is always available, their value can blur into the background. But when access is removed, awareness sharpens. I became aware of what I had lost control over. I could no longer rely on your emotional responses to validate my importance. And that loss of access was destabilizing. Your emotional withdrawal wasn't dramatic. It was calm, and that calm carried more weight than anger ever could. It signaled that you weren't waiting, hoping, or negotiating anymore. You had repositioned yourself, and that repositioning forced me to reassess my own place. It wasn't about wanting you back as much as it was about realizing I no longer had influence. Your detachment exposed how much I had relied on your emotional availability as reassurance of my own relevance. When you emotionally moved on, the dynamic shifted. I was no longer the center of your attention, and that loss of centrality forced reflection. Scarcity didn't create love. It created awareness of boundaries, consequences, and the reality that access is not permanent. Coming back wasn't about love in the way people romanticize it. It was about checking access. I needed to know if the door was still open. If I still mattered, if you were still available in the way you once were, it was less about reconnecting emotionally and more about confirming my position. No contact didn't make me fall in love. It made me aware of what I no longer had access to, and that awareness was uncomfortable. When someone who was once emotionally present becomes unreachable, it forces a reckoning. I needed to know whether the loss was permanent or reversible. Reaching out was a test not of you, but of reality. Were you still there? Would you respond the same way? Was the safety net still intact? I wasn't prepared for the possibility that it wasn't. The urge to come back often comes from uncertainty, not clarity. I wasn't suddenly ready to give more. I was afraid of losing completely. I wanted reassurance that I hadn't been replaced, forgotten, or emotionally closed out. But coming back didn't restore what was lost. It highlighted the difference. Your response or lack of emotional availability made it clear that access had changed. And that realization was sobering. No contact didn't manipulate my emotions. It revealed the truth. It showed me that what I missed wasn't just you. It was the privilege of being emotionally prioritized without earning it. Coming back was about checking if the door was still open. But sometimes the most painful answer is realizing the door isn't closed out of anger. It's closed because someone finally chose themselves.